There are words you'll never forget. They carve into your memory and stay there forever. Clara came back from yoga one evening, glowing with that post-class calm she always had. She set her bag down, smiled at me in that way that used to light up my day, and said, "This is Emily, and now we're going to sleep together, the three of us." I froze. My brain did a quick double-take like it was buffering, trying to process if this was some kind of bad joke or one of her out-there ideas again. But she wasn't laughing. Neither was Emily, who stood there like she was perfectly at home in my house. At that moment, I thought it was just some kind of experiment Clara wanted to try. Another phase in her endless quest to find herself. She was always chasing something. New diets, new hobbies, new philosophies. Maybe this was just the next thing on her list. But as I looked at them, Clara, still beaming, and Emily, who gave me this calm, knowing smile, I felt this unease I couldn't quite shake. I didn't know yet how far they were going to take it. And believe me, I couldn't have imagined just how far. Looking back, I can say Clara was always a free spirit. She had this endless curiosity about life, constantly chasing the next big idea or philosophy that would help her find herself. When we first got together, I loved that about her. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. Creative, spontaneous, full of life. It was intoxicating. But the thing about Clara was, she could never sit still. One month it was yoga, then it was meditation retreats, then veganism, then some wellness guru who convinced her essential oils could cure anything. I used to joke that our house was like a revolving door of hobbies and lifestyles. Every couple of months something new would blow in, and I'd just go with it. She'd always talk about freedom. Freedom of the mind, freedom from societal expectations, freedom in relationships. At first, I thought it was just her way of waxing poetic, you know? I'd sit there and listen to her go on about breaking free from the chains of conformity, nodding like a good husband. Honestly, I didn't take most of it seriously. It sounded nice, sure, but it felt like just talk. But this time was different. Clara had been restless for months, more so than usual. She'd started spending long hours out of the house, going to these yoga classes and so-called healing circles. At first, I thought it was harmless. She was always chasing something, so what was the harm in her stretching and chanting with a bunch of strangers for a few hours? Still, I noticed little changes. She'd come home more distant, less interested in me, in us. When I asked about it, she'd brush me off, saying, "It's nothing. I'm just working on myself." And I bought it. I told myself it was just another phase. But then she started dropping these little hints. Questions like, "Have you ever wondered if we're limiting ourselves by being monogamous?" Or, "Don't you think love could be bigger than just two people?" She'd say it casually, like it was just a passing thought. But something about the way she'd look at me after, like she was waiting for my reaction, set off alarm bells in the back of my mind. Clara was like the wind, I remember thinking, always chasing something new. But this time, it seemed the wind had carried her too far. Because the thing about Clara's idea of freedom was that it had always been a mystery to me. It wasn't just about being open-minded or adventurous. It was something deeper, something that often felt like it was pulling her away from the life we'd built together. And for the first time in our marriage, I was starting to realize that her search for herself might come at a cost. A cost I wasn't sure I was willing to pay. I'll never forget the first time I saw Emily. It was a Thursday evening, and Clara came home from yoga glowing, her usual post-class serenity dialed up to 11. But this time she wasn't alone. Following behind her was Emily, a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of some trendy mindfulness retreat catalog. She was tall, with piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair, and this calm, almost unnerving aura that immediately put me on edge. Clara was practically bouncing with excitement. She introduced Emily like she'd discovered some hidden gem. "This is Emily," she said, her voice full of admiration. "She's a spiritual mentor and my close friend. She's helped me understand myself in ways I can't even explain. You have to meet her. She's a true treasure trove of knowledge." Now, I'm a pretty straightforward guy. I'm not one for all the spiritual mumbo-jumbo Clara was into, but I've always supported her interests. So, I did the polite thing. Shook Emily's hand, nodded at her calm, slow-spoken small talk, and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Emily stayed for dinner that night. Clara and she spent the whole evening chatting about chakras, energy flow, and the limitations of societal norms. I mostly stayed quiet, chiming in now and then to ask a polite question or two. But the way Clara looked at her, hanging on to every word, made me feel like an outsider in my own home. At one point, Clara turned to me with this newfound confidence and said, "You know, Emily has really opened my eyes. She's helped me see how much more life can offer if you're just willing to step outside of the box." I remember giving a small, tight smile and nodding. "That's great," I said, though my stomach churned. There was something about Emily I couldn't put my finger on. It wasn't just her confidence or the way she seemed to command the room. It was how quickly she'd become such a big part of Clara's life. Clara had only mentioned her in passing a couple of times before that night, but now here she was, sitting at our dinner table, speaking like she already had one foot in our lives. It felt like more than friendship, but at the time I couldn't see the whole picture. The truth? I didn't want to disrupt the harmony. Clara seemed happy, and I figured maybe this was just one of her phases again. Something that would come and go like all the others. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the same. Something about Emily's presence felt permanent. And for the first time, I wondered if Clara's search for herself was starting to take her further away from me. It was a quiet evening a few days later when Clara dropped the bombshell. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, the kind of evening where you'd expect to talk about mundane things like what to watch on TV or whether the laundry was done. Instead, Clara looked at me with this calm intensity that immediately told me something was coming. "Adam," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking a lot. About us. About our life." My first instinct was panic. Had I done something wrong? Was she unhappy? But before I could even ask, she continued, "I want us to try something new. Something unconventional." I frowned. "What do you mean by unconventional?" She took a deep breath, as if rehearsing the words in her head before saying them aloud. Then, with a small smile, she said, "It doesn't mean I don't love you. On the contrary, I think it will make us stronger. I want Emily to become a part of our life." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, trying to process what she just said. "You want Emily to what? Be part of our life how?" Clara leaned forward, her expression earnest. "As a partner. For both of us. It's not about replacing you or changing how I feel about you. It's about expanding what we have. It's a spiritual experience, Adam. It's about opening ourselves to something bigger, to more love and connection." I blinked. "Clara, are you asking me to, what? Share our marriage with her? Because that's what it sounds like." She reached for my hand. "I know this is a lot to take in, but this isn't just some wild idea, Adam. Emily has helped me see things differently, about love, about freedom, about breaking down the walls we put around ourselves. This isn't about losing anything. It's about gaining something extraordinary." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was sitting here suggesting we bring another person into our relationship like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know if I can do this," I said honestly, shaking my head. "This isn't what I signed up for." Clara squeezed my hand tighter. "I know it's hard to understand right now, but please just trust me. Let's try it, see where it goes. You might be surprised. I love you, Adam. That hasn't changed." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to shut it down right then and there, to tell her absolutely not. But the other part of me, the part that still loved her, that didn't want to lose her, hesitated. Finally, I said, "All right, but only to see how far you're planning to take this." "I'm not making any promises, Clara." She smiled, relieved, and kissed my hand. "You won't regret this. I promise." But as I sat there, watching her light up at the thought of this spiritual experience, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger and much darker. The first night the three of us were supposed to spend together felt surreal, like I'd walked into someone else's life. Clara had set the stage. Candles flickering on the bedside table, soft music playing in the background. Her usual attempt to create some kind of sacred space. Emily sat on the bed, completely at ease, like she'd been there 100 times before. I tried to act normal, even though nothing about this felt normal to me. I poured myself a drink, thinking maybe a little liquid courage would help me get through the night. But as I sat there, watching Clara and Emily talk and giggle like schoolgirls, I felt this heavy sense of being an outsider in my own marriage. They were huddled together on the bed, whispering and laughing, barely acknowledging I was even in the room. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. They were probably just nervous, right? This was new for all of us. But the more I watched, the more it felt deliberate, like they were sharing some private joke at my expense. I tried to join the conversation a couple of times, but my comments were met with half-hearted smiles or completely ignored. They kept whispering to each other, heads close, occasionally glancing in my direction with sly grins. And that's when my patience ran out. I stood up abruptly, flipping on the overhead light, and the soft, candlelit glow was replaced with a harsh, unflattering brightness. Both of them blinked, startled, and stared at me. "What is going on here?" I snapped, my voice louder than I'd intended. "Are you mocking me? Because that's what it feels like." Clara's jaw dropped, like I just accused her of something unforgivable. Emily, on the other hand, looked completely unfazed, her expression calm and collected. "Adam, what are you talking about?" Clara said, her tone exasperated. "You're seeing things that aren't there. We were just laughing. Why do you always have to make things so complicated?" I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. "Complicated? You've turned our entire marriage upside down, and now I'm the one making things complicated." Emily finally spoke, her voice annoyingly serene. "Adam, I think you're projecting your discomfort onto us. This is a safe space. Maybe you need to take a moment and reflect on why you're feeling this way." I wanted to yell, to demand they take me seriously, but something about the way they both looked at me, like I was the problem, stopped me. They were so calm, so sure of themselves, and it made me question my own reaction. Was I overreacting? Was I really seeing things that weren't there? But deep down, I knew the truth was worse than I could imagine. This wasn't just about me feeling left out. Something had shifted, something fundamental in our relationship, and I was starting to see just how far I'd let it go. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Clara and Emily were already up, sitting in the kitchen, talking over coffee. I stayed upstairs for a moment, thinking about the night before and how things had felt so off. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but as I walked down the stairs, I caught my name in their conversation. That stopped me in my tracks. Something about the tone of their voices felt different. Not the light, airy chatter they'd been sharing since Emily entered our lives. This was serious. I leaned against the wall just out of sight, listening. "I just think he's holding me back," Clara said, her voice quieter than usual. "I've tried to include him, but he's not open to this the way we are. It's like he doesn't get it." Emily's response was calm but firm, the same tone she always used when she talked about her so-called spiritual insights. "You don't need his permission, Clara. You're your own person. If he can't understand that, it's his problem, not yours." Clara hesitated. "But what about?" Emily cut her off. "Listen to me. We can do this without him. You don't need him to approve. This is about your freedom, your happiness. And I'll be here to support you, no matter what." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Do this without me? What exactly were they planning? Was this about our relationship? Or was it something more? My heart was pounding as I stood there, straining to hear more. But the sound of a chair scraping against the floor snapped me back to reality. They were getting up. I quickly retreated up the stairs, careful not to make a sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the conversation in my head. Clara wasn't just experimenting anymore. She wasn't just exploring herself. This was bigger than that. They were planning something, and it was clear I was an obstacle. I knew it was time to act, but I also knew I needed more proof. If I confronted her without solid evidence, she'd just twist the story, paint me as paranoid again. No, this time I had to be sure. And whatever they were planning, I wasn't going to let it blindside me. That evening, after dinner, Clara left her phone on the counter, while she and Emily stepped outside to meditate under the stars. Normally, I wouldn't touch her phone. Privacy and all that. But after what I'd overheard that morning, my gut told me I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed it, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. I knew her passcode. I'd seen her enter it 100 times. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to see the evidence I was sure was there. But I needed answers. I opened her messages and went straight to her thread with Emily. What I saw made my stomach turn. There were dozens of texts, plans for private gatherings, cryptic mentions of new connections, and even mentions of money. One message from Emily read, "We're meeting tomorrow night. He won't know. I've got everything arranged." Clara's reply was like a knife in my chest. "He doesn't suspect anything. We can keep going." It feels so freeing, doesn't it? I kept scrolling, reading messages that painted a picture I hadn't fully grasped until that moment. They weren't just building some spiritual bond. They were meeting with other people, multiple other people, and from the way they talked about it, it was clear they were hiding it all from me. Another message from Clara hit me like a brick. "Life feels lighter without him holding me back. It's like I can finally breathe." It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the cold, casual way she talked about me. Like I was some weight she was trying to shed. Not the husband who'd been there for her through everything. This was more than I had imagined. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. Clara was living a double life, dragging me into her chaos while secretly shutting me out. I locked her phone and set it back on the counter, my mind racing. I'd been patient, understanding, even willing to compromise for her happiness. But this wasn't about freedom or spiritual growth. This was deceit, plain and simple. As I sat there, I made a decision. They thought they were clever, keeping me in the dark. But they'd made one big mistake. They underestimated me. They were going to regret that. After I saw those messages, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the dark, replaying everything I just read, every whisper of betrayal. But the anger, it didn't hit right away. At first, there was only sadness. I kept thinking about the early days of our marriage, back when things were simple, before the retreats, the yoga, the spiritual mentors. Clara used to laugh so much back then. Real laughter, the kind that lit up a room. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, traveling the world, building a life together, raising a family someday. I remember our first big trip, backpacking through Europe on a shoestring budget. She got us hopelessly lost in Paris, but instead of panicking, she grabbed my hand and said, "We'll figure it out. It's an adventure, right?" That's who Clara used to be, the woman who made me believe we could handle anything as long as we had each other. And then there was the night we moved into our first apartment. It was tiny, and the walls were so thin we could hear the neighbors arguing through them. But we sat on the floor eating cheap takeout, laughing about how it was ours, no matter how small. That night, Clara looked at me and said, "I don't care where we live or what we have. I just want to be happy with you." That version of Clara feels like a stranger now. I'd always been the one holding us together. Every time life got messy, I'd pick up the pieces. When she went through her endless phases, I supported her, even when I didn't understand. I thought that's what love was, being the steady one, the anchor. But now I was watching her destroy everything we'd built. It hit me like a punch to the gut. She didn't want to hold on anymore. And for the first time, I realized I didn't want to either. Her happiness had become a weapon, an excuse to tear down the life we once dreamed of together. And the part of me that had always wanted to protect her, to shield her from her own chaos, it was gone. I couldn't save her anymore, and I didn't want to. It wasn't enough to know what I'd seen on her phone. I needed more, something undeniable. I couldn't risk her twisting things around again, making me look like the paranoid husband who just didn't get her need for freedom. So, I started paying closer attention to her schedule, her sudden disappearances, and her vague explanations about where she'd been. One evening, While Clara and Emily were out for yet another meditation circle, I opened her laptop. I figured if her phone was full of secrets, her email or browser history might be too. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There it was, a folder tucked away in her email, labeled Work. Inside were messages between her, Emily, and people I'd never heard of, people listed as clients. They weren't just meeting others in secret, they were getting paid for it. The messages included details about meeting locations, times, and even requests from these so-called clients. One email from Clara to Emily stuck out like a sore thumb. "Don't worry, Adam doesn't suspect a thing. This is the easiest money we've ever made." My stomach churned as I scrolled through the messages. This wasn't about freedom, spiritual growth, or even some misguided search for happiness. They were running some kind of operation, lying to my face while using me as a cover. When Clara came home that night, I was waiting for her. She walked in, smiling, as if everything was perfectly normal. But the second she saw me standing in the kitchen, her smile faltered. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. Her eyes flicked to Emily, who stood just behind her. "Okay," she said cautiously. I didn't waste any time. "I know about the clients, Clara. I know you're not just meeting people for fun. You're taking money from them." Clara's face twisted in anger, and she crossed her arms defensively. "That's not true. You're making things up because you can't handle my freedom. You're jealous of Emily and me, and now you're looking for reasons to control me." I couldn't believe her nerve. She lied to my face without hesitation, like I was some idiot who couldn't see the truth staring me in the face. "You've been lying to me for months," I shot back. "This isn't about freedom, Clara. This is about you destroying everything we've built because you care more about your spiritual experiments than our marriage." Her voice rose, trembling with fury. "You're twisting this, Adam. You don't understand what I've been going through. You're so closed-minded, so stuck in your little box of what marriage is supposed to be." But I wasn't buying it anymore. The sadness, the doubt, the willingness to compromise, it was all gone. I stared at her, cold and unflinching. "This is the last time you'll lie to me, Clara." Her mouth opened, as if to argue again, but the look in my eyes must have told her I was done. She didn't know it yet, but I had already started putting my plan into motion. If she wanted freedom, I was going to give it to her, but not in the way she expected. I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for revenge. I don't believe in screaming matches or dragging people through the mud for show. But after everything Clara had done, after all the lies, the betrayal, the complete disregard for our life together, I couldn't just sit there and let her walk all over me. The night I confronted her, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight with her. I wasn't going to beg her to come back to reality or try to argue her out of her delusions. Instead, I was going to protect myself, my dignity, and everything I'd worked for. The first thing I did was gather every bit of evidence I had. The messages on her phone, the emails on her laptop, even the recorded conversation I overheard between her and Emily about doing this without Adam. I made sure it was all neatly organized. Screenshots, timestamps, everything. I didn't want to blow it up publicly. What good would that do? Humiliating her wouldn't change what had happened. No, I wanted something else. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I explained everything, our situation, the evidence I had, and how I wanted to proceed. He listened carefully, and when I was done, he said, "You've got a strong case, Adam. This'll protect you in the divorce, and if she tries to come after your assets, she won't have a leg to stand on." That was all I needed to hear. I handed over every piece of evidence, ensuring I had the upper hand if things turned ugly. Then I went to the bank and froze our joint accounts. Clara had no idea how much control I actually had over our finances. While she was off chasing her so-called freedom, I'd been the one managing everything, paying the bills, saving for our future. She wasn't getting another dime from me. When Clara tried to use her card that afternoon, it must have been a shock. She came storming home, furious, demanding to know why her card had been declined. "What did you do?" she snapped, her voice dripping with indignation. I didn't flinch. I protected myself, I said simply. You wanted freedom? Well, now you've got it. But don't expect me to fund it. Her face twisted in anger, but underneath it, I could see something else, fear. For the first time, Clara realized she wasn't in control anymore. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to ruin her life. All I wanted was for her to feel what I felt. The betrayal, the helplessness, the realization that the person you trusted most had turned their back on you. And judging by the look on her face, I think she finally understood. Clara didn't crumble immediately. At first, she did what she always did. Acted like everything was fine, like she had everything under control. But I could see it in her eyes. She was unraveling. She tried to lean on Emily, of course. I overheard snippets of their conversations as they whispered late at night. Clara was panicked about the frozen accounts, about how unfair I was being. Emily, calm as ever, reassured her with vague platitudes about new beginnings and trusting the process. But then, Emily started pulling away. Clara didn't notice it at first, but I did. Emily stopped staying over as often. She'd cancel plans last minute. And one day, while Clara was out, I overheard a voicemail from Emily. I think it's best if we take some space, Emily said in that infuriatingly serene tone. I found someone new to work with, someone who's more aligned with my path. I hope you understand. By the time Clara got home, Emily was gone. No calls, no messages, nothing. Just like that, the woman who had supposedly opened Clara's eyes to freedom had moved on to her next project, leaving Clara completely alone. That night, I left a note on the counter. I kept it short, just enough to say what needed to be said. You wanted freedom? Here it is. But now it's freedom without me. I packed a bag, walked out the door, and didn't look back. I filed for divorce the next day. With the evidence I'd gathered, it was an easy case. Clara didn't contest anything. She couldn't afford to. I kept the house, my savings, and my peace of mind. The day the divorce papers were finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't just lose Clara that day. I let go of all the lies, the manipulation, and the pain she'd caused. I started fresh, focusing on rebuilding my life on my own terms. Clara was left to pick up the pieces. With no access to our joint funds, no financial support, and no Emily, she was forced to face the consequences of her choices. I heard through mutual friends that she tried to reach out to some of the clients she and Emily had worked with, but it didn't lead anywhere. The people who'd indulged her freedom disappeared the moment it stopped being convenient for them. She moved into a small apartment, far from the life we'd built together. And from what I've heard, she's still trying to figure out who she is, this time without anyone else to blame. Emily vanished as quickly as she'd appeared. I have no idea where she went, and frankly, I don't care. Maybe she's off ruining someone else's life, or maybe she's finally found what she was looking for. All I know is that the chaos she brought into my marriage is gone, and I intend to keep it that way. Clara once told me she wanted freedom, that it was the key to her happiness. But freedom, as it turns out, is a double-edged sword. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away, leave everything behind, and start over. Because real freedom, it isn't about chasing every fleeting desire. It's about knowing when to let go. And that's exactly what I did.